Yeah, Attica Locke talked about that in her interview, that very, very rarely in life are things black and white.
Mhm.
That you have to sit in the complexity of the gray. And like we hate it. We want a definitive answer. Like we want like, this is how you make $1 million. This is how you find love. And
Right.
unfortunately, it's just not that straightforward.
Welcome to At the Podium with Patrick Huey, and today with Corinne Bowen, myself. I am the founder of Corinne Consulting, and over the past, I think it's been 3 years now,
Almost 3 years.
Patrick has been working with us, and we've had the joy of helping him bring At the Podium to the world. So today we're switching seats a bit, and I get to ask Patrick some questions, which is, I'm sure, a bit of a, I don't know, I mean, we're up to 69 episodes now, so you're pretty used to being the interviewer at this point.
Yeah, this will be the 70th episode, and I've already started shooting season 3. So yeah, it's always weird when it's like flipped, which I mean, it's good. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Not easy.
I'm excited to ask you some questions today about what you've found in this past season. And I wanted to kick things off actually with a quote because I was doing my homework, as I know you always do yours. And I came across Marsha Ann Donaldson Brown's episode. That was episode 51.
Yeah.
And when I read these quotes by her, they just really seemed to encapsulate a lot of what season 2 talked about. So Marsha Ann says, at the end of the day, know this. All you have is this one life, and you are deserving of living it fully with intention, with peace, love, and joy unspeakable. And nothing or no one is worth it for you to be dragging through life broken.
Mm.
Then she goes on to say, if we're not careful, we'll live life in a time capsule, trapped in the dogma of what society says or what has been said to us. I'm on a mission now to embrace that within this season we occupy, that we're living it fully. And to me, that really was the message and the life that so many of these people brought to At the Podium to share. In season 1, we talked about saying yes, those magical moments where we were at a crossroads and we decided to say yes to one path,
Yeah.
and which is very inspiring and was so enriching, to hear all about all these different yes points in people's lives. And in season 2, we got to learn about how people have found their voice and what the message is that they're sharing with the world. And, more than ever, I think we, in this post pandemic world, our voices are clearer than ever,
Mm.
because of this time that we've gone through globally. And it was really inspiring to hear all the different messages that you helped people. The word that comes to my mind is like midwife.
I helped them birth
Like,
it.
yeah, it was just so wonderful to, to hear their stories and to hear about their voices and their messages.
Yeah.
Uh, so I wanted to start with the origin stories that we got to hear, because a lot of them were very challenging, sometimes incredibly dark
Yeah.
origin stories that these people came to the show with and vulnerably shared, with you. And I'm wondering, after holding space and connecting with these people through their stories, what do you think it is that propelled these individuals forward in such a positive way? Because they're all impacting the world in their unique way now, but many of them came from grief, abuse, discrimination, addiction. So I'm just curious what you feel pushed them into or propelled them into a positive direction.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking about Nigel Franklin, who lost his mother, and George, who wrote his amazing book, All Boys Aren't Blue. That's been banned
Mhm.
in schools, one of the most banned books in the country right now about his coming to terms with his gender, his sexuality, and the abuse that he experienced. I think about Marsha,
Mhm.
who, in the midst of the pandemic, decided to take her life in a whole new direction and ended her marriage and came clean with her audience about her struggles with lupus. And I think for people, there's a catharsis in telling your truth and telling your story. I think there's that kind of quote that we're only as well or as sick as our secrets. And I think we are in a moment where it's almost okay to speak your truth. Um, and I and all in those four instances, I feel like the truth for them was about healing those parts of their lives, about saying it. I mean, if you can say it and claim it, it no longer has a hold on you. Um, and I think that's part of that process of revealing, but not in a salacious, not in a tabloid way, but revealing in order to heal. And it's just freedom. It's complete honesty and freedom. Because once you say it, the power it has over you is just it's gone. I look at someone like David who grew up homeless on the street, and he's turned that experience into a platform to change the world,
Mhm.
to get kids off the street, out of the system. Um, and he's done it without anger or blame. As a matter of fact, he sort of walks away from that. David Ambrose in his book A Place Called Home. So I think these stories, the challenge that people are coming out of is the springboard, the platform for reconciliation,
Oh, yes.
you know.
And also, I would say that each time they shared their truth, shared their story, they are taking apart the systems that may have hurt them and also healing so
Mm.
many other people who also have that story by sharing it, and those people now know I'm not alone, and maybe I can heal too.
Yeah, I'll
um
tell you, Marsha Ann, to this day, her episode is one of the most watched that we had. And she still gets and she sometimes shares them with me. Sometimes I think she doesn't because the information is just too personal that she's getting. But some of the feedback that she has gotten from that episode, you know, is staggering,
yeah.
you know. And even in season one, with McCord and his journey through alcoholism,
Mhm.
and his episode continues to move and touch people because he was just so open and honest and vulnerable about that. And he's sort of like not your poster child for
Mhm.
profound alcoholism. But when you're laying on the floor in a apartment, alcohol and throw up all around you, where do you go from there? That's like literally the inflection point of your life. You can either die in that moment or you can decide to change your life. And maybe we have all had those moments of real coming to terms with yourself because we were sort of on lockdown for it depends on what state you were in, but in California we were on lockdown for a couple of years.
Mhm.
um, so when it's life or death, things get real for people.
And you know one so the next thing that I wanted to touch upon is how so many of your guests did not allow themselves to be defined by societal norms. They knew their voice, and they knew that it didn't, align necessarily with what the systems in place were telling them they should be. Um, and I really, one of the episodes that pops into my mind is Zach's about his bipolar um
Yeah.
diagnosis and just the evolution of his mental health journey. And when I listened to it, I felt like, wow, I've never heard somebody talk about mental health in this way, and that that story, him telling his story, I mean, if you don't suffer from mental health issues, someone very close to you who does. I mean, and I think we learned that more than ever through the pandemic and recent history. So, he was one of the people that really jumped out at me as redefining something that we took for granted in the past. What are some of the individuals who, sort of busted through societal norms that really impacted you and kind of like stood out to you in season 2?
Sort of tied to Zach, Giselle Guerrero
Mm,
talked about the importance of mental health for people of color, and how
mhm.
even today it's still taboo, that people don't really want to talk about it, own up to it, admit it. But like the real importance, and I think for her too, because she's in her 20s. So I think a lot of that too is generational, that they just have a very different perspective around that, but it's still pervasive. And so I think both Zach and Giselle both highlight it's fraught when you have a mental illness or a mental challenge. I want to get the language right. And we're still working through it because it's still something that we cannot physically see. Like there's a lot of, understanding and research and funds and space in people's lives for things like Alzheimer's and cancer. But when you start stepping into the worlds of people's minds, it's very challenging because we don't have I mean, we don't have a huge history of how we deal with it in a productive way, you
Yeah,
know. Um, so I think, those two jump out as not being defined or being sort of limited by what people think. Um, I think another person who really stood out as not being defined by their experience was Kevin Chadwin, uh, who lived through the experience of his father killing his mother and his siblings, and ended up in a world of escorting and all of that. And in his story, usually that's the end of the story. Normally you end up, not in a good place, you know. And he's really turned his life around. He's used his story as a vehicle to talk about HIV, AIDS in the gay community, to talk about rights for sex workers. He's now about to start his master's degree in Detroit, I believe in public policy. So this man given up, could
mhm.
have given up. And I've talked to him subsequent to our conversation, and I know that he's very much committed to using what happened to him as a mechanism, as a platform for change, and to help people um, who are not who are usually overlooked in society, right? And so
Right.
that's been a big part of what he's doing. So Kevin is he's an exemplar of that for sure. That
Yeah.
was a shocking interview to do. I was just like,
Yes.
some stuff
Mhm.
I was just like, I wasn't, it was, um, and I'm always very cognizant when I talk to people, that I want to make sure that I put out something that they would feel comfortable with me putting out. And sometimes people say very personal things to me that I feel may not be for public consumption. And so I will take those out because everyone deserves their zone of privacy.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about the theme of this season. And, when we originally were brainstorming and talking about where to take season 2, and we decided on voice and, how did you develop your voice and what are you saying with it? Like, how are you using it? Now it's like there's this deeper level that I'm realizing, which is how do we, like, really what sets so many of these people apart is the fact that they said no to shame, to the shame that people or, institutions are trying to put upon them, and they use their voice anyway. There's that deeper level to it of like, what did you need to overcome in order to use that voice?
Yeah.
And I would say almost every single one of these people had to overcome something in order to share that voice. And it makes their message and it makes their impact that much more powerful and healing to not only themselves, but to everybody who's listening to what they have to say.
Hmm. Yeah, I think about Janine Scott, who was raised by a teen mother. She herself ended up pregnant as a teen. Um, and again, we all have these moments in our life when we have to make a choice, right? Where we have to decide, am I going to be broken by what's happening to me? Or am I going to find a way to stand up and what's the old saying? You fall down 100 times. That saying where you fall, but you keep getting back up. But and maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's the secret sauce of people who are successful and whatever that means for you, right? It's not always
Right.
about a ton of money, but you only have two options. Either you get up and fight or you don't.
Hmm.
And you know, that's
Yep.
the story. That's the story that people, we celebrate that in very big ways, but there are people every day who we don't even know their names who are getting up every day in the face of extraordinary circumstances and standing up and not and choosing not to give in to whatever the thing is that is holding them back or breaking them down. And I think that that feeling of being broken and held back and held down, it's influenced our world. And I think part of what we're experiencing now in all the complexities of what we're experiencing is that people are just tired of being broken or tired of being told no or being
Hmm.
tired of being told you've got to fit this particular mold, you've got to fit this particular thing in order to survive. So I think it's very relatable to where people are right now. And maybe as we keep throwing off the yoke of oppression and and discrimination and being cut out and left out, it has totally rattled the cage of the world. And now we're all
Completely.
trying to figure out what is level ground because, it's just not.
Well, connection is such a big part of it, right? And once we feel connected to another human being, it changes the whole game in terms of the way that we interact with that person and treat that person. And I think, a big part of this show is human connection through
Yeah.
story. And a lot of the individuals in this season talk about their grief, they talk about loss. They've experienced grief in very intense ways. And also, grief is just this universal human experience, right? And I was listening to Jimmy's episode,
Oh,
and you know, I think he is a perfect example of what we just spoke about. He lost his wife when she was 29. She died of cancer, and he was at a point where he could have let his grief swallow him, or he could use it and to propel him forward with his dreams. And that's the path that he chose, and she inspired him to go on that path. But as I listened to that episode, it makes me think of all the people in my life who have experienced grief, and it helps me to understand them more deeply. And so it's like every time I listen to an episode, I might think when I turn one of the episodes on, like, I don't know if I'm really good. Can I relate to this guy who's, the head of whatever? And then I listen to their story, and it's like I'm riveted because I get to hear about, their childhood. I get to learn about, those teenage years, or, whatever it was that they had to overcome to get to where they are today.
yeah.
And that fortifies me. It helps me understand my neighbor better, my friend, my father, whoever it might be.
Yeah, when Jimmy and his business partner reached out about that episode, they really wanted to come. If you guys have not done their burn board, y'all need to do it because it's awesome. It's not easy. Um, but they came on. I had a conversation with them, and they were like, "We really want to talk about the burn board," and I was like, no,
That's not gonna work here.
that's not gonna work for many reasons. Um, I said, we can talk about the burn board and the success you've had with it, but it needs to be in context for something because otherwise it's just an infomercial. And within that second, um, they were like, we'll talk about how the birth of it, which was his wife's passing away, and also his own relationship to him wanting to be a comedian and an actor and pursuing that, and how he had to let go of that in a sense, in a way, to
Mhm.
open up the space for this fitness experience, this burn board to come into play. So yeah, and that he still has a sense of humor.
Yes, he's a very
Yeah,
lovable guy.
yeah, and just like authentic, like just like a true soul.
Yes,
Um,
because he's been to dark places, and then he's taken that and he's shared it with the world and been honest about it.
yeah,
I mean, that's a recipe for, a human being that I want to learn about. And it's a story too of, I think when he was trying to launch his company, I mean, he got hundreds of no's before he got a yes.
300 no's, I think he said, or something like that.
And it's like, wow, that's inspiring. A lot of us give up after a handful of no's,
Yeah, I know. But you know
It
what's
just
cool
goes
about
to show.
yeah, and I didn't think about it till just now, but also what's cool about his story is that in his in the death of his first wife and then finding love and having a child with his second wife, there's a real lesson there in that the love that he has with his current wife is big enough to hold the love that he had for his first wife. And I think that's really and we didn't frame it that way when we were talking about it, and but as I sit and think about it, that's really sort of like a really beautiful message because so many people don't know how to pick up and move after a spouse dies or a partner dies. And the right person who comes along is a person whose love is big enough to hold the
Yeah.
love that you have for that person who's no longer here. Yeah.
I think that's another big message of at the podium is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's that whole idea of yes and, that both of these things can exist and we don't have to choose one or the other. It's this new, I mean, it's a way of living and thinking that I think more and more people are learning to embrace. And the individuals who you speak to in the show are able to hold that at the same time.
Yeah. Attica Locke talked about that in her interview that you have to hold both things that very, very rarely in life are things black and white.
Mhm.
That you have to sit in the complexity of the gray, and I think that comes up a lot in all these interviews, I think, is that people they sit and both things are true. And we hate it. We want a definitive answer. Like we want like this is how you make $1 million. This is how you find love. And
Right?
unfortunately, it's just not that straightforward. Everything is both.
It is. It is. And the more we can hold that, the more tolerance we have, the more, open-heartedness we have and the better off we are. And I think sometimes it's just a matter of hearing someone's story who has embraced both to be like, oh yeah, maybe I can do that too. You know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, listening to all of these clear, strong, inspiring voices, not everybody listening is there yet.
Yeah.
It's like, they're it's wonderful to hear all these people who are there. And I'm sure, our voice evolves and our messages change, as we evolve, of course. But for those who are listening to season 2 and who are yearning to find their voice and to find
Mm.
their message, what advice would you give them?
Mm. I don't know. I have to think about that one. You should have sent me these questions in advance. Okay. No, I think
What makes you think of the honesty piece you mentioned before?
I think it's honesty, and I also think, your voice changes, right? And I think in finding your voice, you have to give your permission for whatever you're finding to shift and change over time. And I kind of go back to sort of how I kind of view the world. A lot of themes that come up on these shows are about moving away from safety into the unknown
Mm.
around things like travel, seeing different countries, different people, reading books, helping out at a shelter. Because once you start moving out of your comfort zone is where you start to find what your true opinions are, you know? And it's so funny. I'm in Nashville right now, and I went to school in Nashville. I don't talk about Vanderbilt often on this show. I talk a lot about Yale. But I was at Vanderbilt this week, and when I walked onto the campus, I actually sort of like cried a little bit. One of my
Mm.
friends was like, "Oh, you love a good cry," which I do. But when I walked onto that campus, it struck me that this is where I was formed in many ways, where the adult version of myself kind of came into being, where that foundation was laid, and how much I've changed and grown since then, and how much has remained the same. So I think there's something in, and I went 1,000 miles away from Houston to go to school, really far from home. And I'm talking a literal physical distance in space, and sometimes that's just not possible or would not. But I think the more that we're able to put ourselves in situations where we have to call upon our beliefs and our own and question what our view of the world is, I think that's where your voice is formed. Because if you think about all the stories that we talked to, no one woke up knowing what their voice was. They had to come through heartache and victory and success, and the voice changes, and what you have to say changes. Um, but I think a lot of it is, you got to put yourself in a situation where you have to challenge what you believe, what you think you believe, and
That's
otherwise
so,
it doesn't emerge.
yes, yes, that really resonates. So, yeah, it's all about stepping out of your comfort zone and being willing to take a risk to use your voice and to see, we have to experiment with it. We have to be willing to step out of that safety of saying whatever we think might make people happy or approve of us. There's risk there. Um, there is safety that we're letting go of when we do start to embody our true voice.
I also think there's a cautionary tale there too. I also think that as you sort of like start to find your voice, if the voice that you find is hurting people or causing discord, maybe you're on the wrong path because that's not generally how you want to present yourself in the world. Sometimes it's easier to be the bad guy or to be the jerk or
Mhm.
to be the villain with what you're trying to say or do. But I think, I think it's really important that whatever you're using your voice for, that it's for good and for expanding and not subtracting and taking away from people. Because there's that risk too that you start
Sure.
you start finding what you're looking for, and all of a sudden it's like you're not adding to the conversation, you're subtracting, or you're
Mhm.
hurting people, or
Well, it goes back to what we just talked about, which is that sort of yes and, like,
yes, and
being able to use your voice and holding space for other voices at the same time.
yeah.
You're trying to drown other people out. Yeah, beautiful. I love that. So, what are you sharing with your voice?
Today, my cold that I have. Um,
And this might go along with what is coming for At the Podium in season 3.
I just interviewed Regina Bain yesterday for season 3, and she was like, "It was a long time between season 2 and season 3." I was like, "Yeah, it was very long because I didn't know who I wanted to talk to. I couldn't figure out who I wanted to talk to or what story I wanted to tell. How am I using my voice? That's a great question. Hopefully, I'm creating a record of positivity, creating a space for people to have honest, safe conversations. I don't know if that's my voice or if that's my sort of
Vision.
vision, and I
Mhm.
mean, and maybe it's the same. But I feel like this platform is probably the purest form of my voice publicly.
Mm. Hmm.
and the newsletter. But I'm just so sick of the stupid conversation. I'm so tired of dumb conversations. I'm so tired of conversations that wrench people apart and appeal to just our lowest common denominator. So my voice is, how do we not do that? How do we create space for, coming together versus tearing apart? Um, and I literally have zero tolerance for it anymore. That it's there's no good can come from it. There's nothing good that can come from it. And so, that's what I think this platform and my voice is about. And it's changed me in a way. Like, it's made me much more forgiving of people and tolerant of people. And I think my voice is changing too, what I want to say. Because so much of it before was about leadership, which is still very important to me. But also now it's like, no, how do you be like a good person, a thoughtful person? And how do you add to versus subtract? And the minute you start doing that, life puts you in situations where that's tested, where, okay, you wanna take the high road. Let me throw some mess in front of you and see how you do. You know, yeah,
Yeah. And I'm curious that, I mean, all of that makes so much sense. And it's what I've heard through your voice over these years. And I'm curious, how do we hold space and have these conversations, when you're in these interviews with these amazing individuals and you want them to feel safe and open and be able to share, how can we also embody that? Like, what would you say helps to create better connection and more vulnerability and openness?
listening. And I don't talk a lot in these interviews on purpose. Because oftentimes in conversation, and I notice it a lot, people are not listening, they're just waiting for their turn to talk. So the person who's speaking doesn't feel heard. Yeah, I listen to people. I think something else that has helped is that I do my homework about them. It's not just the interview of the day for me or whatever. It's really, really trying to understand who that person is, and really, hopefully, by listening and understanding who they are, that lets them really open up and talk.
That just what you said about listening for the sake of listening and not thinking in the back of our minds, what are we going to say next in this,
Yeah,
in order to look smart or not look stupid, depending on the perspective that we have.
yeah,
Man, would that, just that one thing would change the world.
the world, the
Yeah.
world. And being truthful, like, you got to be real and truthful as you can be, you know. And when you know better, you do better and all that stuff. But you got to be truthful. You can't lie.
Right, right, right. I'm curious, can we give listeners, as we wrap up season 2, what can we give listeners to be excited about in season 3?
Well, season 3, I don't know how many interviews I will do because I feel very sort of picky about who I'm talking to right now. But season 3 is all about people's legacies and what that means for them. And it means something different to the people I've talked to. Everyone has a different perspective on what that word means, which is good. But I'm interested in this notion in what we leave behind and how we are remembered, what good we did do, who we didn't do right by, all of it. Like the whole total package that we leave behind. And it's the season of my life, perhaps. I mean, I've had, 3 people in this past year pass away. One not unexpected, two unexpected, two in the prime of their lives, in their mid 40s. And so, if you die today, what would the message be? What would the eulogy be at your sermon, at your funeral? Um, and so I'm interested in, what are we just doing here? And how are we making the world a better place? And
And how are we even thinking about that in our day-to-day life?
many are not. Many are thinking about how I can get more TikTok views, or how can I increase my following on Instagram, or whatever the nonsense is. Which is important. It all has a place, like, but at the end of the day, I think it's how we impact the worlds and communities that we live in and the people that we come into contact with for the better.
I love the full circle of that with season one and season two,
Yeah.
because the yeses that determine, the big turns in our path and how
Yeah.
our legacy builds and grows, and the voice piece in season two is also such a huge part of that, and if we all start thinking more about our legacy, you know things can only get better, I would hope, if we're more
Yeah.
cognizant of that on a daily basis.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're all gonna leave the earth, we're all gonna die. I think about people in my career who've said to me, you helped me send my kid to college because you gave me a job that paid me well, or you helped me feed my family. That's like huge. And it's also very outward looking. It's not an inward looking thing to a certain degree. It's not
Yeah.
legacy for the sake of like legacy itself, but it's also about how do you do you leave this space better than you found it? And that can be a job, that can be your life, that can be a relationship, etc. Because everything has a beginning and an end, right?
Right.
And so when the end happens, is it better because you were there or is it worse? Or is it more better than worse? So I think, all those questions are on my mind right now because, we're not here forever. And I've had two colleagues pass away this year, two friends pass away this year who should still be walking around.
Mhm.
And I think, it is not a forever game.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really excited to not only listen to these interviews, and I'm lucky because I get to listen to them before anybody else, but also to really think about this question.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really important question, and I am, excited to ponder it more, and you know, to go on this journey with you. And I'm excited for the next retrospective we have, because then I'll get to ask you about your legacy.
Yes. Yes. I'm ready for that. I'll be ready for that.
Yes,
Oh my
yes.
goodness.
Wonderful. Well, anything else you wanted to share about season two, Patrick?
I hope people listen. I hope people sign up for my newsletter.
Yes.
I'm going to start writing again in the new year. Sometimes quiet is good. Sometimes
Yes.
sometimes seasons of reflection are really important. Um, but yeah, no, I'm excited. I hope people listen to season two and season one. Thankfully, they are because I see when people do listen.
Yes, they're
Um,
timeless. That's the thing about these episodes and these conversations, is that it's not about like one point in time. You could listen to these episodes, I think probably 100 years from now and still, relate and gain from them. So
yes, yes. Well, and I appreciate you and Marianne. So it's always fun, you know.
oh, it's such a joy. I've learned so much through this experience, and I've had the chance to meet some incredible individuals. So
Yeah.
this is definitely a gift. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Corinne. We'll do this in a few months.
Yes. All right.
Right.
Bye,
To those of
everyone.
you who are watching or listening, remember we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone.